Alex Pereira is moving up to heavyweight. Not as a test run. Not as a one-off experiment to see what happens when you throw a light heavyweight champion into the deep end against genuine 300-pound men. As a legitimate title contender, fighting Gane for the interim heavyweight championship of the world at the White House card. And the reason this fight is more interesting than most people are treating it is because the stylistic matchup creates a specific set of problems for both men that have not been fully worked through in the public conversation. Pereira brings weapons that work at any weight class. Gane brings movement and physical attributes that have given the best heavyweights in the world serious trouble. This is not a mismatch in either direction. This is a genuinely fascinating puzzle with a title at stake. Let's start with what Alex Pereira brings to this fight, because his toolkit deserves a serious technical breakdown rather than the shorthand version that most coverage falls back on. The calf kick is the foundation of his offensive system at range. It is not supplementary. It is not a setup for something else. It is the weapon that controls the fight before the fight happens, because when it lands consistently and with Pereira's power behind it, it degrades his opponent's movement in ways that compound over rounds. A fighter who cannot move laterally with confidence, who flinches every time weight shifts toward the front leg, who has to think about protecting the calf rather than committing to their own offense, that fighter is already losing the fight before they've taken a significant shot to the head. Pereira has used this weapon to systematically dismantle multiple opponents across multiple weight classes. And the question heading into the Gane fight is whether Gane's footwork, which is genuinely exceptional for a man his size, gives him tools to manage the calf kick in ways that Pereira's previous opponents couldn't. The elevation jab is the second piece that doesn't get discussed enough. Pereira uses a jabbing motion that incorporates a subtle duck or level change, and what this does mechanically is disrupt the timing of opponents who rely on up-and-down movement to create their own offensive opportunities. Fighters who use herky-jerky, unpredictable movement, the kind of movement that makes them hard to time, hard to counter, hard to hit cleanly, find that Pereira's elevation jab interrupts the rhythm before it can fully establish itself. He is not just throwing a jab. He is throwing a jab that addresses a specific movement pattern at the same time. And then, when he ducks down coming out of that jab, he sets up the right hand from a position where his head is off the center line and his opponent's hands are busy responding to the threat above. The combination of the calf kick at range and the elevation jab at mid-distance creates a two-layered offensive system that forces opponents to make decisions they don't want to make. Now let's talk about Gane, because he is not a standard heavyweight and treating him like one leads to bad predictions. Gane is the outlier at heavyweight in terms of movement. He does not plant his feet and exchange. He does not rely on size and power the way that most men his size do. He moves in and out of range with an in-and-out motion that is genuinely difficult to time, especially for opponents who are accustomed to heavyweight fights where the distance problems are more static. He is bigger than Yuri Prochaska, who is a very good test of how Pereira handles movement-based opponents at light heavyweight, and that size combined with his footwork creates a specific version of the void problem that is the central tactical question of this fight. The void problem is simple to describe and brutally difficult to solve. Pereira controls the space between himself and his opponent in a way that makes closing the distance extremely costly. Every time Gane tries to come forward and establish his own offense, he has to cross that void. And crossing that void means entering the range where the calf kick finds the lead leg, where the jab finds the face, and where one mistimed advance results in one of the most powerful left hooks in combat sports history landing on a chin that, while solid, is not invincible. The John Jones comparison is worth addressing directly, because it is the first thing that comes up in any discussion of Pereira moving to heavyweight. Jones used his wrestling to neutralize Gane's movement, took the fight to the ground where Gane's footwork advantages disappeared entirely, and produced a finish that made Gane look vulnerable in ways his previous performances hadn't suggested. Pereira is not a wrestler. He has not built his championship runs on takedowns and ground control. He is a striker, and he is going to stand with Gane and try to solve the movement problem on the feet rather than by removing the feet from the equation entirely. That is a harder path. It requires him to be accurate, patient, and disciplined in a way that wrestling-based fighters don't have to be, because wrestling removes the variables that make Gane dangerous. Pereira cannot remove those variables. He has to navigate them. What gives Pereira a real chance in this specific context, beyond his obvious physical power and finishing ability, is his composure in exchanges. He does not rush. He does not get drawn into reactive fighting where his opponent's movement dictates the pace and position of the fight. He waits. He reads. He absorbs information across the early rounds and he uses it. Against Prochaska in their second fight, he managed the complexity of a fast, unpredictable opponent by staying calm when most fighters would have been rattled and finding the opening when it came. Against Gane, the same quality will be tested at a different weight class against different physical dimensions, but the underlying demand is similar. Can Pereira maintain his composure while a large, fast, movement-based fighter makes him uncomfortable, and can he find a moment when Gane's pattern becomes readable enough to punish? The calf kick answer for Gane is the key tactical question the fight will be decided around. Gane's in-and-out footwork, when it works correctly, means that he is rarely stationary long enough to absorb sustained leg kick damage. He steps in, he throws, he steps back out. The problem is that the step back out requires weight transfer, and weight transfer creates a brief window where the lead leg is loaded and the calf is exposed. If Pereira can time the kick to that transition moment, stepping back out rather than stepping in, he can catch Gane in a position where the defensive options are limited and the damage accumulates. This is a chess match between Gane's footwork timing and Pereira's kick timing. Whoever solves that problem first gains control of the entire fight. The hands-down problem is also worth discussing in the context of this specific matchup, because it has been a documented tendency in Gane's fights that when he is making his in-and-out movement and his hands are occupied with managing distance, his defensive position through the head is not always clean. Pereira's high kick has ended fights. It has ended fights against opponents who saw it coming and couldn't get their hands up in time because the setup was too fast, because the commitment to closing the distance left them in a position where the defensive response was a millisecond too slow. Against a man moving as much as Gane, the high kick is a legitimate secondary threat that Gane's camp has certainly prepared for, but preparation and execution are different things. You cannot fully replicate the timing and power of Pereira's kick in a training camp environment. You can approximate it. You cannot duplicate it. The interim championship dimension matters here in ways that go beyond the obvious. Tom Aspinall is injured and the heavyweight title picture is complicated. A Pereira win at heavyweight makes him a two-division champion with interest in a third. That has never happened in UFC history in the current era of the sport. A Gane win establishes him as the interim champion with a legitimate claim to fight Aspinall for the undisputed title. Both outcomes have significant implications for where the heavyweight division goes in the next 12 to 18 months. And both fighters are walking into this knowing that the White House card is the most globally distributed UFC event in history, that the audience watching this fight includes millions of people who have never watched an MMA event before, and that the performance they put on will be the first impression many of those people have of what this sport actually looks like at its highest level. The size difference is real and it deserves honest acknowledgement. Cyril Gane walks into heavyweight at a natural weight that makes him genuinely larger than Pereira, even accounting for the move up in class. Pereira has competed against large, physically imposing opponents before, but he has not competed against a man with Gane's combination of size and movement at this weight. The question of how his power translates, whether the calf kick does the same structural damage to a larger leg, whether the left hook carries the same stopping power against a heavier man's chin, is one that can only be answered inside the octagon on fight night. The reasonable assumption is that power translation decreases somewhat with the move up in weight, but Pereira's finishing ability has been so consistent and so spectacular across his career that it would require a significant reduction before it becomes a non-factor. Here is how this fight unfolds. The early rounds are Gane's best opportunity. His movement is freshest, his footwork most precise, his ability to make the void crossing costly for himself most reliable. Pereira reads, accumulates information, throws the calf kick to begin the process of degrading Gane's movement confidence, and stays patient while Gane tries to establish his preferred distance game. If Gane can maintain that movement through 3 full rounds without taking significant damage, the fight gets complicated for Pereira in the championship rounds. But if the calf kicks land with regularity in rounds 1 and 2, if Gane's footwork starts to show the effects of leg damage the way that most fighters at most weight classes eventually do, then round 3 or 4 is where Pereira finds the opening he has been building toward. The left hook or the high kick in a moment where Gane's hands are occupied and his weight is transitioning. The finish that sends the White House crowd into a moment they will be talking about for years. The pick is Pereira by stoppage, middle to late rounds. The caveat is that Gane is the most movement-sophisticated opponent Pereira has faced at the heaviest weight class of his career, and if Gane can solve the void problem cleanly and consistently, this fight tests Pereira in ways his previous opponents could not. But Pereira's finishing ability, his composure under pressure, and his systematic use of the calf kick to degrade opponent movement give him the tools to make this a winning performance on the biggest stage the sport has produced. 2 weight classes. Multiple championships. And now the heavyweight division watching to see what happens when the most dangerous left hand in MMA walks into the deep end.